There are moments in life when all seems to lie in fragments, scattered as though some careless hand has broken the pattern. The road grows dim, the heart grows weary, and the soul begins to believe that nothing will ever change. Yet it is often in these hours of shadow that the hand of God is working most deeply, preparing us not merely for survival, but for a turnaround so great that it seems impossible to our limited imagination. God is not hurried by our impatience. He is not bound by the clocks that rule our days or the calendars that measure our years. What looks to us like delay is, in truth, a deliberate preparation. The soil must be plowed before it can yield a harvest. A seed must be buried in darkness before it can rise to light, and a heart must sometimes be broken before it can carry the weight of glory. The turnaround you long for is not an afterthought in God's plan. It is woven from the beginning, though hidden from your eyes until the appointed hour. We often confuse the impossible with the unimaginable. What you cannot yet imagine, God has already written into the story of your life. He is the master craftsman, shaping not only your future, but your very soul, so that when the change comes, you are able to bear it. If He were to grant you the great reversal you desire before you were ready, it might crush rather than bless you. Therefore, He works in secret, chiseling away pride, teaching endurance, and kindling faith, until the very impossibility becomes the ground of your miracle. The truth is that God delights in impossibilities. It is not within His nature to be constrained by the walls we build with our doubt. He raises the dead, parts the seas, and makes streams flow in deserts. To do the impossible is His signature, and to prepare His people for such wonders is His mercy. The greater the impossibility, the greater the glory when it is overcome. If you stand before a mountain that cannot be moved, take heart. That is precisely where God chooses to display His power. But preparation is never wasted. Consider the long years of hiddenness endured by those whom God used mightily. Seasons that seemed like silence were in truth seasons of training. It is in the quiet places of struggle and prayer that strength is forged. It is when doors close and paths vanish that faith learns to walk without sight. You are being prepared in ways you cannot yet understand, and the very trials you despise may be the tools shaping you for the destiny you will one day cherish. The turnaround, when it comes, will not be a mere change of circumstance. It will be the unveiling of purpose. You will look back and see that the delays were not denials, but designs. You will discover that the nights of weeping were the seeds of a joy too great to be explained. And you will know that the impossible was not an obstacle, but the stage upon which God revealed His glory. So stand firm, though the winds blow and the storm rages. Trust, though every appearance seems against you. Wait, though waiting feels like breaking, for God is not merely preparing a change in your situation. He is preparing a change in you, and when the great turnaround arrives, it will be more than you ever thought to ask or imagine. It will bear the unmistakable mark of the one who makes the impossible possible. God's preparation often looks like delay, but it is the hidden work that makes you ready for the turnaround. God's preparation often looks like delay, but it is the hidden work that makes you ready for the turnaround. When we stand in the midst of waiting, it is easy to assume that nothing is happening, that perhaps our prayers have gone unheard, or that our lives are stuck in an endless circle of frustration. Yet the reality is that waiting seasons are never wasted when God is involved. Just as a farmer does not reap a harvest immediately after planting a seed, so the soul must endure a time of hidden growth before fruit appears. Beneath the soil, where no human eye can see, the seed is breaking open, its roots pressing downward, drawing strength and nourishment from the earth. Only after this hidden work is complete does the tender shoot break through the ground and make itself visible. In the same way, God is at work beneath the surface of your life, preparing the unseen foundations for the great turnaround He has planned. The challenge is that our perspective is limited. We live in moments, in hours, in days, while God orchestrates eternity. What feels like delay to us is simply timing to Him. Imagine a child impatiently waiting for bread to finish baking in the oven. The child cannot understand why it cannot be eaten immediately. To snatch it out too soon would mean raw dough instead of nourishing bread. Likewise, when we demand that God move according to our schedules, we are asking Him to deliver something half-formed, something that would harm us rather than bless us. His delays are merciful because they protect us from receiving too soon what we are not yet able to handle. Preparation is not merely about external circumstances aligning. It is also about the shaping of our inner lives. Character must be forged, endurance must be built, humility must be learned. The turnaround God promises is often bigger than we can presently bear. To entrust us with it prematurely would be like giving a child the weight of a crown that his head is too small to carry. The delay is God's way of enlarging our capacity, strengthening our shoulders, and deepening our faith. It is in this hidden work that He transforms weakness into strength, fear into courage, and doubt into trust. Think of the long seasons endured by those who became instruments of great change. David was anointed king as a young shepherd boy, but he did not ascend the throne immediately. He spent years fleeing from Saul, learning the lessons of trust and patience in caves and wilderness. Joseph dreamed of greatness as a teenager, yet he was sold into slavery and thrown into prison before he ever stood in Pharaoh's court. Each delay was not a denial of the promise, but a refining of the man who would hold the promise. Their stories remind us that hidden preparation is as much a part of God's plan as the final breakthrough. Without it, the turnaround would lack the depth and strength it requires. There is also a divine mystery in the way God works through what seems like stillness. We may look at our lives and see no progress, but He is orchestrating connections, aligning events, and softening hearts in ways we cannot perceive. While the seed is buried in darkness, the soil above it may appear unchanged, yet life is stirring beneath. When the time is right, what was hidden bursts forth suddenly, and all the waiting seems as though it was only a moment. God's work is often invisible until it is unstoppable, and the delay is only the prelude to a swift and undeniable change. Another reason preparation feels like delay is because God often addresses things within us that we are reluctant to surrender. He calls us to let go of bitterness, to forgive, to trust, to yield control. These inner battles take time and they cannot be rushed. It is one thing to desire a turnaround in our situation, but it is another thing to allow God to bring a turnaround in our hearts. When the inner change has been accomplished, we are no longer the same people who began the waiting. The blessing does not simply fall upon us. It flows through us, transforming how we live, how we give, and how we glorify Him. What seems like delay also trains us in dependence. If every prayer were answered instantly, faith would never grow. Waiting teaches us to lean on God's promises even when evidence is absent. It teaches us to trust His character when His hand seems hidden. In the silence, we learn that He is enough, even without the turnaround. And paradoxically, it is often in reaching this place of surrender that we find we are most ready to receive what we had been waiting for. The preparation has done its work, the heart is steady, the faith is anchored, and the turnaround, when it comes, does not overwhelm but establishes us. Thus, what looks to us like delay is in truth the careful, deliberate preparation of a God who loves us too much to give us less than His best. The waiting is not wasted, the silence is not empty, and the hidden work is not forgotten. Every moment is part of the unseen construction of the turnaround that will one day burst forth into sight, and the delay will be revealed as the very means by which we were made ready to carry it. The impossible is the very stage where God chooses to reveal his glory and power. The impossible is the very stage where God chooses to reveal his glory and power. When human strength runs out, when every door has been closed, and when all avenues of reason have failed, that is where the stage is set for the divine. We spend much of our lives trying to avoid the impossible, preferring the safe, the manageable, and the predictable. Yet history and faith both testify that God rarely chooses to display his greatness in the realm of the ordinary. He steps into the impossible because it leaves no doubt that the outcome was not born of human effort, but of his hand alone. The pattern is woven throughout the scriptures and the stories of those who have walked in faith. The sea does not part until the people stand trapped between Pharaoh's army and the waves, with no path forward and no way back. Bread does not fall from heaven until hunger gnaws at the bellies of the wandering Israelites in the wilderness. The dead are not raised until the mourners have resigned themselves to loss, and the stone has sealed the grave. God does not avoid impossibility. He welcomes it, for it is the very canvas upon which he paints his glory. When all human hope has ended, divine hope begins. This truth is uncomfortable because it means that impossibility is not a sign of abandonment but of preparation. We imagine that when we face a challenge too great for us, we must have been forgotten. Yet, it is precisely in those moments that God is most present, watching as faith is tested and as hearts are stretched to believe beyond what they can see. The impossible becomes a furnace, burning away self, reliance and pride, leaving us with the simple confession that unless God moves, nothing will change. It is in this place that faith becomes pure, not because circumstances make sense, but because we learn to trust the one who transcends all sense. The impossible also reveals the limits of human wisdom. We are clever in crafting plans and skilled in devising strategies, but there comes a point when none of our knowledge can rescue us. No strategy can open a womb declared barren. No plan can raise a body already lifeless. No human reasoning can part a sea or calm a storm with a word. The impossible strips away the illusion of control and forces us to confront the truth that there is a power beyond us, a wisdom higher than ours, and a strength that does not grow weary. When God works in the impossible, it is not simply about solving the problem. It is about reminding us who He is. It is also worth noticing that God does not always remove the impossible obstacle immediately. Sometimes He allows us to remain in its shadow longer than we would choose. The walls of Jericho did not fall after one lap. They fell after 7 days of walking in circles that seemed foolish to every eye. The widow's jar of oil did not overflow until she began to pour it out in faith. The disciples did not see the risen Christ until after their night of despair and confusion. This lingering in the impossible is intentional, for it draws us into deeper reliance and trains us to believe even when nothing changes before our eyes. The very length of the trial makes the deliverance all the more undeniable when it comes. There is a paradox in the way God chooses the impossible. To us, it looks like the end. To Him, it is the beginning. We see a wall, He sees a gateway. We see an empty table, He sees a feast waiting to unfold. We see a grave, He sees resurrection. The impossible is not a barrier to Him, but an invitation. It is the place where His power is not merely spoken of but seen. And when He moves, the impossible not only shifts but collapses entirely, leaving no trace of doubt that it was His doing. The glory revealed in the impossible is not just for the one who experiences it, but for those who witness it. When Lazarus walked out of the tomb, it was not only his family who believed, but the crowds who saw. When the Red Sea parted, it was not only the Israelites who marveled, but also the nations who heard the story. The impossible, once overcome, becomes a testimony that ripples far beyond the immediate moment. It becomes a story told to children, a truth proclaimed in sermons, and a beacon of hope for those who will face their own impossibilities. God's glory is not confined to the event itself. It spreads, inspiring faith in countless hearts who see what He has done. Yet we must also understand that God's glory revealed in the impossible often does more than change circumstances. It changes us. The person who has stood before the impossible and seen God move is never the same again. Faith is deepened, worship becomes more authentic, and life takes on a new perspective. What once seemed insurmountable is now a reminder of His faithfulness, and every future challenge is seen through the lens of what He has already accomplished. The impossible becomes not a source of fear, but a testimony of possibility with God. Thus, when we face situations that defy human solution, we stand on the threshold of His glory. The impossible is not the end of the story, but the arena in which God chooses to show Himself strong. It strips us of our illusions, forces us into faith, magnifies His name, and leaves behind a testimony that can never be erased. And though we tremble before the impossible, it is there, in that trembling, that we encounter the majesty of the One who delights to do what no one else can do. The true turnaround is not just a change in circumstances, but a transformation of your heart and purpose. The true turnaround is not just a change in circumstances, but a transformation of your heart and purpose. When we think of breakthrough, we often imagine it in terms of external shifts. The job we have long desired, the healing of our bodies, the restoration of broken relationships, or the sudden removal of obstacles that weighed us down. These are real and significant, yet the deeper work of God is rarely confined to outward events. He is far more interested in who we become in the process than in what simply changes around us. A turnaround that touches only our circumstances but leaves our hearts untouched is incomplete. The truest work of God is to align our souls with His will, to reorient our desires, and to give us a new sense of purpose that is rooted not in our own ambition, but in His eternal plan. When circumstances shift without inner transformation, the blessing cannot be sustained. Consider a person who gains wealth but never learns generosity, or someone who receives freedom but still carries chains of bitterness within. External change without inward renewal is like pouring clean water into a polluted vessel. Sooner or later, what is inside will corrupt what has been given. God, in His wisdom, begins by turning our hearts before He turns our situations. He reshapes our thinking, teaches us to see differently, and calls us to trust in ways we had not before. This inner transformation is not a secondary blessing. It is the very core of the turnaround. Part of this transformation involves learning to release control. Human nature clings tightly to its own plans, fighting to maintain authority over outcomes. Yet God cannot fully move in a heart that insists on its own way. True turnaround comes when surrender becomes complete, when we let go of the demand for things to unfold according to our timetable and instead rest in His wisdom. It is in this posture of surrender that we find peace, even before the external breakthrough arrives. We begin to see that the greatest change has already taken place, not outside of us, but within us. Another dimension of this transformation is the purification of desire. Many times, the things we ask God for are tinged with motives that are more about self than about Him. We long for success so we can be admired, for healing so life can return to comfort, for provision so fear of lack will be silenced. God, however, desires that our motives be refined. The turnaround He brings teaches us to long for His glory above our own, to desire His presence more than His gifts, and to seek His kingdom first. This refining of desire does not happen in an instant. It is shaped through seasons of waiting, wrestling, and learning to say, "Not my will, but yours be done." When the heart is aligned in this way, Every external blessing becomes an opportunity to reflect His glory rather than to indulge our pride. The transformation also involves expanding our capacity for faith. Before the turnaround, we may have prayed small prayers, believing only for what seemed likely. But through the process of waiting and trusting, God stretches our vision. We begin to believe Him for more, not because circumstances look favorable, but because His character has proven faithful. The turnaround is not simply that a need was met. It is that we are now people who believe in greater things, who expect God to do above and beyond what we once imagined. This enlarged faith becomes the foundation for future callings and challenges, equipping us for greater works than we had previously thought possible. With transformation comes the discovery of true purpose. Often, when we pray for a turnaround, we think of it only in terms of relief or personal blessing. But when God moves, He always does so with a larger story in mind. The breakthrough you receive is rarely just for you. It is meant to spill over into the lives of others, to inspire, to comfort, to testify. A healed heart becomes a voice of compassion for the broken. A restored life becomes a witness to those still in despair. A provision received in faith becomes a reason to be generous with others. The transformation of heart and purpose ensures that the blessing does not end with us, but becomes part of God's greater plan to touch the world through us. Even the pain endured before the turnaround becomes part of the transformation. The struggles, disappointments, and tears you carried are not wasted. They shape empathy within you, they soften harshness, and they prepare you to walk alongside others with understanding. The person who has been through the fire can comfort those still walking through flames. The scars of yesterday become the testimony of today, and the very things you wished away become the means by which you fulfill a greater calling. This is the mystery of God's work, that He redeems not only outcomes, but also the very process that seemed unbearable. It is in this way that the true turnaround becomes deeper than any change in circumstance could ever provide. A heart once fearful becomes steady, a life once aimless discovers purpose, a soul once consumed by self begins to reflect the love and humility of Christ. These inner shifts remain long after external blessings fade, for they are eternal in nature. Circumstances will rise and fall, seasons will change, but a transformed heart remains steadfast. It carries within it the eternal imprint of God's work, and no trial, loss, or disappointment can erase it. So when we speak of a great turnaround, we must see it not only as a moment when everything changes on the outside, but as a process through which we are made new on the inside. God desires more than to rearrange our circumstances. He desires to remake us. What we thought was only about getting out of difficulty becomes instead about stepping into destiny. What we believed was only about relief becomes about transformation. And in that transformation, we find that the greatest turnaround of all was not simply that life looked different, but that we ourselves had been changed into who we were always meant to be.